The saying might be, there's nothing new under the sun, but science challenges that statement on a regular basis. Such was the case this week as NASA's New Horizons became the first spacecraft to reach the dwarf planet Pluto. Our understanding of the solar system will change, but so might our spiritual systems. Back in 1969, when Neil Armstrong took that giant leap for mankind by walking on the moon, a minor crisis erupted in Jewish liturgy. A sweet little ritual acknowledging the new moon includes the words, "I leap toward you, but cannot touch you." Was that an appropriate thing to declare once humanity stood on the lunar surface? And now, all sorts of new information will change the way we look at the cosmos. How should that impact our spiritual perspective? Joining me now is my teacher and friend, Rabbi Elliot Dorff, professor of Jewish theology at the American Jewish University. Elliot, welcome back to State of Belief Radio.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
We have a pretty clear understanding of what ancient people were looking for when they looked to the heavens. What are we looking for today? It's not just pure science, is it?
No, I think it is definitely science, and then that what we are going to find out from these new discoveries is more about the origins of the universe and more about the chemistry of how we are made and how the universe is made, and hopefully maybe even some facts about how we can avoid the kind of climate crisis that we seem to be hurtling into, so that we can preserve the environment that sustains us. So hopefully all of those scientific things will be the results of this new discovery of Pluto and of whatever else we are able to discover as a result of this mission. But the other piece of it, from a spiritual point of view, is that this can only add to the awesomeness of the universe that we live in. Part of what I don't go to religion to teach me science, but one of the things that religion does for me is that it gives me a sense of awe about the world around me, so that I don't take it for granted, and so that I'm able to appreciate everything from the intricacy of a leaf and the intricacy of my own body to the awesomeness of the universe. And this, if anything, makes that awesomeness even greater.
So that's a great answer, especially because you managed to bring both Pope Francis and Abraham Joshua Heschel into one response.
I'm happy to do that. Right.
So, Elliot, you were about to graduate seminary in 1969. Do you remember anything about the conversations about this little moon ritual that I talked about?
Oh, absolutely. We, as it happens, that summer my wife and I were accompanying a youth group trip to Israel, and it happened during the summer. So we were in Israel and watching this on BBC, and it was just amazing. And I remember talking at the time with both the staff members and the teenagers of this group about what kinds of rituals we might want to create to recognize the awesomeness of the ability of human beings to literally step on the moon. That was awesome in several ways. Number one, that human beings were now able to do this. So there's a new appreciation of the abilities that we as human beings have, but also of the fact that our appreciation, our knowledge, first of all, and then also our appreciation of the universe was now greatly expanded. Now it wasn't something that we just looked at. Now it was something that some of us actually walked on, and it was. And then, of course, it raised all kinds of questions, maybe of the science fiction variety, but still all kinds of questions about whether we were going to be able to find other planets and other universes that could sustain life, and maybe that life was going to be like ours in some way. I mean, there were all kinds of conversations about that during 1969, after Neil Armstrong stepped on the moon.
And so now here we are in 2015 having some of those same conversations. Again, there's a very real component of belief in the way we think about outer space. What does the way we look at worlds beyond tell us about humanity here on Earth?
Well, I think it first of all gives us a sense of humility, which we human beings frankly need. It gives us a sense that we are very small in a very vast universe. And I think that that's at least one part of what the religious message to us has to be. One of my favorite Hasidic sayings is that a person should have two pieces of paper, one in each of his or her pockets. One that says, for me, the world was created, and on the other, I am but dust and ashes. So I am but dust and ashes is the humility part of what each of us has to have. On the other hand, we also have to have a sense of, for me, the world was created. That is, that each of us has inherent worth, given to us by virtue of the fact that we're created in the image of God, if you're talking about the Western religious traditions, and that as a result, we have to, on the one hand, appreciate our lives and do with them the best that we can to make them meaningful and to help contribute to the world at large. That's on the one side. And on the other side, we have to be appropriately humble about what we can do and what we have done.
You know, Elliot, your approach to Jewish life and practice has always included this brutal honesty about what science tells us. How is it that you maintain your faith when some of its presumptions are challenged so seriously by emerging knowledge?
Well, I'm lucky by virtue of the fact that the Jewish tradition has dealt with emerging science really from the very beginning. So that, I mean, one of the things that I've always found rather amazing is that in the first century, a Jewish philosopher by the name of Philo in Alexandria interpreted the opening chapter of Genesis in terms of Plato's Timaeus, because that was the science of the time, the astrophysics of the time. 1,000 years later, Maimonides or 1,200 years later, is interpreting that same chapter in Genesis in terms of Aristotle's metaphysics, because that was the science of the time. After you get evolutionary theory, Darwin, and so on, you get Jews interpreting the first chapter of Genesis in terms of evolution. And I mean, I think basically, so in other words, I've inherited a tradition that uses the Hebrew term is midrash, that uses the techniques of interpretation and reinterpretation to enable us to understand, to say our liturgy and to understand our sacred text in terms of modern science. So, for example, on every evening, Jewish liturgy has us in the very first blessing of the evening service talks about the awesomeness of the fact that there is day and night, and that there is the orders of the stars in the heavens and the orders of the seasons. However, that paragraph does it on the basis of ancient science, where God rolls the night before the darkness and the darkness before the night. This is based on ancient science, where the world was flat and there was a dome above us, because when you look in the heavens, it looks like a dome. And the reason, and now we know that it looks like a dome because of the curvature of the earth, but they didn't know that at that time. And the way that they understood the change from day to night and night to day was that the sun rolls on the inside of the dome from east to west during the day, and then it goes through an opening in the west and goes on top of the dome at night. That's why you don't see it. And then it magically reappears in the east in the morning when it goes through another opening on the other end of the dome, and then enters on the inside of the dome. That was ancient science, and that's what's built into that prayer. Does that mean, now that we know that that's not the way that day and night happen, does that mean that we can no longer say that prayer? No, it just means that we understand that the point of the prayer is not the science. The point of the prayer is to make us aware of the awesomeness of the fact that the universe works, and that the very scientific laws that govern the universe actually work, so that we are able to exist. The very end of that prayer says, God, may you sustain this order forever, and which is really a prayer, because without that order we could not possibly exist. So in the same sort of a way, I mean, I've been involved in several different commissions for the American Association for the Advancement of Science. I've been on 3 different federal commissions on scientific issues, and now I'm on a state of California commission. I don't see any problem whatsoever in terms of incorporating science into my religious view. Quite the opposite. I think that if I could not incorporate what we learn from science into my religious view, then then first of all, I could never be honest about my own religion. I could never, and I could certainly never do what the Shema, a central prayer in the Jewish tradition, requires me to do. This is Deuteronomy chapter 6. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. I could never really do that. I could never integrate all of my being into my religious commitments unless I could be honest about what science is teaching me.
So on a clear Saturday night in Southern California, just after the new moon, do you look up in the sky and say, I leap toward you but cannot touch you? You still able to do that?
Sure. I still can't. I've never been on the moon. So for me, it still is indeed a true prayer. And even for Neil Armstrong, or for some other person who in fact has been on the moon, at the moment that he or she is saying that prayer, they're not on the moon. I mean,
I guess that's right.
Okay. But even, let's say, just for the fun of it, let's just say that it was a Jewish person who happens to be now on the moon at a time in which the new moon happens on Earth. And could that person say that prayer now while on the moon? Yeah, because I think basically that person could say, well, I happen to be on the moon at this moment, but in the vast majority of my life, both in the past and in the future, I'm not going to be able to step on the moon. It's just not part of my life.
Got it. Elliot, the knowledge we'll gain from New Horizons comes literally from the margins of our solar system. What should people of faith, Jewish or otherwise, look for at the margins of our belief systems?
I think in order to have a reasoned faith and an honest faith, which is something that I'm very committed to, that one has to be aware of and all of the frontiers of science. In this case, we're talking about astrophysics. But I think we have to be aware also of what science is telling us about sexual orientation and about how that works, and we have to adjust our own understandings of homosexuality and of heterosexuality based upon what we are learning from science. I was just reading an article yesterday by a Muslim woman who's saying that she and her fellow Muslims really have to adjust what they believe about homosexuality given the new science involved. I think we have to do the same sort of thing in terms of how we apply our traditions to beginning of life issues, to end of life issues. As you know, I do a lot of bioethics, and that field has been immensely affected by the leaps and bounds that medicine has taken over the last 50 years or so. In the year 1900, life expectancy in this country was 45. In the year 2000, just 100 years later, it was close to 76. Most of that was public health measures, that, the fact that we get vaccinated, the fact that we're taught to wash our hands before and after going to the bathroom and before meals, the fact that we have public health education that teaches us not to smoke and to drink alcohol only in moderation, and that teaches us that we have to worry about obesity. Those are the kinds of things. I mean, the public health measures are a large part of that, but that has really educated us to take care of our health in ways that my parents and certainly my grandparents could not possibly have known were problematic, and did not have the ways of avoiding diseases through vaccinations that we have. So, I mean, I think if religion is going to be real, it has to take into account what we are learning from science each and every day. And then it needs to integrate religious insights into how we understand science. So that what that means is that religious insights, both in terms of the kind of humility that I was talking about before, but also religious insights on the moral issues. So, for example, when we're talking about, when we're talking about this mission into outer space, we're spending, from what I heard this morning, $700 million on this. I think that's money well spent, but I think it's also a real moral concern as to, do we spend money doing this, or do we spend money solving the issues of poverty or of climate change on our own planet? I think that's a legitimate moral debate, and I think that there's room for both, but that we really have to take on these kinds of moral questions that science is posing to us. It goes back to the old Kantian point. Immanuel Kant, at the end of the 18th century, a philosopher in Germany, in Prussia really, pointed out that when you cannot do something, then you never have to ask whether you should, because you can't. But as soon as you can do something, then you do have to ask whether you should, because there are all kinds of things in life that you can do that you should not do. You can smoke, but you should not. You can abuse alcohol or drugs, but you should not. You can send a man to the moon, and you can send a probe into outer space, but does that mean that you should? Well, especially given other needs that we have in society. And I think that that's a legitimate question, a legitimate moral question that science raises, and I think that there can be a variety of different viewpoints on that are well-reasoned. But it's a discussion that we really need to have because there are limited resources that we have. So, I mean, I think in order to have a real faith, and a faith that affects us both as individuals and as a society, we must learn what science is telling us about ourselves and about the environment in which we live, including the solar system in which we live and the universe. And then we need to integrate both the insights of religion and of science so that we can live with we can love God with all our heart, with all our soul, and with all our might.
Well, I'm just very glad that one of the guides we have on that journey is you.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Rabbi Elliot Dorff is professor of Jewish theology at the American Jewish University in California and chair of the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards of the Rabbinical Assembly. Elliot, thanks so much for being with us today on State of Belief Radio.
My pleasure, Jack. Thank you.